One of the most common requests I get is how to handle multi-step wizard forms in React. While these can be challenging to implement, modern React development makes it possible to create a concise, scalable, and maintainable solution. Today, I'll show you how to handle complex forms the best way, especially multi-step wizards with great user experience and clean code that's perfect for enterprise-level applications. But before we start the tutorial, I want to mention that most of my viewers are not subscribed to my channels, and this content took a lot of time to create. If you find it helpful, please consider subscribing and giving this video a like. It really helps me out. Thanks. Now I'm going to show you a quick showcase that what we are going to achieve in this tutorial. You can also find the link to this repository on GitHub so you can clone it on your machine and follow along with the tutorial. By cloning the repository, if you head over to this tab on the sidebar, you're going to open this new employee form. Consider a scenario that a new employee wants to submit his resume on our platform. The form consists of 5 main steps, and the user can navigate between all steps by clicking on each step like this. The steps are like, for example, personal info, which the user will fill his basic information, and the other steps that are self-explanatory, and each step contains multiple technical challenges that you're going to mostly face in creating these types of multi-step forms. For example, the things like dependent fields like this, where the existence of another field is related to another field like this. For example, if the user selects a state like this, the city or the complete will show up, and user also can select his desired city like this. Also with correct loading states like this, which also I have created mock data for our project with a random delay of a few milliseconds for the data to be loaded. Now, when the user starts to type in each field like this, the inline errors are immediately shown to the user for great user experience. Also, some of the fields has their own unique formatting styles for the user to create his desired data more easily like this, and other fields are simple like this, and each of our components here has their own unique reusable components, so we can use them whenever we want easily. The components like text fields, date pickers, autocomplete, and so much more. And for example, if the user tries to submit a page that is not complete like this, all the errors are going to be listed above the form for great user experience. And if a user tries to, for example, click on each of them, the field is automatically focused so the user can easily knows what he has entered wrong so far, and he can easily correct them like this, and the errors are going to be gone as soon as they are resolved. For example, if I fill all the fields like this, and if I provide a valid email like this, the errors are gone, and for example, I can click on save and continue. And if I try to again get back to the personal info page again, and for example, if I try to reload the page, we see that all the data that the user has entered so far are persisted on the user's local storage for better user experience. Also, there is a simple reset button with the confirm dialog message, and when the user confirm it, the form is reset to its initial state. Now, for example, for the history step of our form, for example, if the user selects the career advancement for his reasons, he can continue filling up the form. But if, for example, he selects also the other option here, we see that another field with its validation is going to be shown here, and it's going to be rendered dynamically. So the existence of this field is dependent that whether the user has chosen a specific value on the autocomplete before itself. And this scenario also is common in enterprise forms. And also, again, for example, if the user fill this data and again click on save and continue, we see that we also need to fill up these fields. And also we have errors here that the previous employers and educational institutions are also required. So the user must click on the previous employers new button to create and specify his previous employers, or if the user, for example, needs to add another employer, he can click on this button and another employer will be here, the employer name, job title, and responsibilities for his previous jobs, each of them with their own unique validations. For example, I'm going to fill all these fields like this. And also for the educational institutions, we also need to fill the degree obtained, field of study, institution name, and the graduation year like this. And if everything is correct and filled correctly, and as before, if we try to save and continue our step here, the data on the previous page will be saved on the user's local storage. Now this is also mostly the same as previous steps, but the difference is that we have also another dynamic field arrays here that, for example, for the first row of this form where the user needs to enter his skills, first of all, he needs to select the category of his skill, the subcategory that are going to be loaded from the server, for example, dynamically, and also he can select his skills in that category and subcategory, which the data are going to be fetched or rendered dynamically based on the chosen options like this. And for example, if the user changes this subcategory to e-commerce, the skills are going to be different. He can enter the years of experience or description. And if he tries to submit them again, all the errors are listed again. So I'm going to fill them. Now I can hit on save, and this is also the same, but there are multiple new controllers like this, like for example this slider here, or the references which are the same as before. Contact information, for example, must be an email like this, test@test.com, for example. And on the last page where for example the user needs to, for example, read the terms and conditions of the website, and if he tries to submit the form without accepting terms and conditions, it's gonna throw an error that he must fill it, check the checkbox to continue. And at the end, if the user tries to submit the form, a summary of what the user has entered so far are gonna be listed, so the user only can view them, and if he is okay with it, he can submit the form, and the form is submitted to wherever that he wants. Now, if I, for example, try to open the local storage here on the browser, head over to the local storage, we see that all of our datas, let me just make it a little bit bigger, all of our datas of each step, like the history page, personal info page, skills page, and all other pages are saved to the user's local storage for each step like this. And if suddenly a field is not validated, for example, I'm gonna remove the street address on the personal info step like this. And if I head over to the form itself again, we see that on our stepper, we see a red error that the form data is invalid. So the user always knows what is the problem and where is the problem, and he can easily fix it like this. And now the form is validated, and the user also can submit his form, view all of his information, and again submit his form to wherever that he wants. Now, for example, if suddenly the user's storage, all of its data is deleted somehow, for example, like this, and if the user tries to submit the form, we see that all of the steps on our form is throwing him an error, and the user knows which page has invalid data and the fields must be filled. So this is what we're gonna implement in this tutorial. And as you saw, there are so many technical aspects that we need to consider to make these types of forms, also with a great user experience in mind. But before we jump into the project, I'm gonna show you an overview of what dependencies and packages we are gonna use in this tutorial. There are so many aspects that we need to consider for this tutorial and enterprise level forms. Our asset management solution is Zustand version 5 and Immer for better state updating. The data fetching is your preference. Here I'm gonna use React query for simplicity. For the UI components, the project is heavily related on MUI version 6, Naughty Stack for showing the user notifications, and date pickers version 7 of MUI again. And also the project is heavily dependent on the React hook form and also the Zod. With these versions here, the routing is your preference. Also, I'm gonna use React router version 7, and also for better type safety, we are gonna use TypeScript in our project. But the most important of them is React hook form and MUI for our UI components, and also the Zustand for our asset management solution. Now, before we jump into the tutorial, first of all, I'm gonna give you an overview that what structure we are gonna use in our project. This is our src folder, and inside our src folder, we have a very common React folder structure like this, our shared components here, which are in this folder, our utilities, like formatting the errors, our dictionary, our regexes, our theme, Zod config, and so much more are in this folder. And also, the most of our time is going to be spent on this features folder, where all of our important features are listed here. Our layout feature, which is responsible for a very few things like our dashboard layout, a theme toggle button, our user store hook, which is provided by Zustand and is responsible to keeping the user's theme preference, and also the state of our sidebar, and also a simple utility function, file named constant, like the drawer width and some other things. Now let me just close it. Also, our confirm here is a very simple yet very powerful and useful feature that is responsible to wrap all of our project inside the provider and context. And by using this use context, or wherever we use it, we call it use confirm, we can easily show up the user a simple dialog that the user can accept or cancel the operation that he wants to do. Let me just close it again. The form feature is responsible for managing and wrapping all of our controls like autocomplete, checkbox, the slider, text field menu, and also the error message summary that we saw earlier, the thing that is going to be shown above our form provider itself for better maintainability. Also, a simple error message utility to show the related Zod error in our forms. Also, we really want to use the power of React hook form, and also we need to extend the form context of React hook form a little bit. So we are gonna create a custom hook with the name of use form context, and also a use form logger for debugging our form, and the types itself, which is the context of this form context. Now for our main feature here, the employees, as you can see here, for each step that we saw earlier, the personal info, additional info, and other steps, we're gonna have a folder here, and all of these folders here and all of their related validations that we're gonna see in a few moments are gonna be wrapped in this wrapper here, and this wrapper is gonna be exposed from our module, so we can use it inside this routes file, so the user can see all of this feature wrapped inside this wrapper here. And the pattern is very similar to other features. We have a components folder, hooks, types, and utils folder, and also a page folder that we're going to use it inside our routes.tsx file here. The stepper is the thing that we saw here. This is the stepper. The summary dialog is the dialog that is going to be opened when the user wants to submit and review his data. We have a use mutations hook, which is responsible to submit the form, and the user store to save the data on the local storage. The types, the schema here is all of the schemas in other features in the types folder merged together inside our wrapper. So at the end of the form, behind the scenes, we're gonna validate all of the fields on all the other steps. So we are 100% sure at that state that everything the user that has entered is correct. Let me just close this wrapper here. As you can see, the pattern is very similar for better maintainability. For example, let me just open it again, the employees, and for example, the additional info step here is our references, field array, hooks. This use queries is responsible to get the autocomplete options, user store as previous to save the form data on the local storage, the types, which has a simple schema file, which is very important inside all of the features, and a simple API, which is responsible to talk to the API server, but currently in this project is simulated by adding a delay, like we are fetching real data from the database. And also the pattern is going to be repeated for other pages and features. There is a page.tsx for each feature with its own unique hooks, the schema type, and the utils like this, which is a very good structure that you can use to develop and maintain your enterprise level React projects with complex and heavy forms. Now let's head over to the VS Code and the project itself. As I told you before, you can also clone the project in the description down below. If you have followed and watched this video till this point of the tutorial, I really appreciate you to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and it really helps me out. Thanks a lot. In the SRC folder, we have our routes here configured like this, a very simple routing system using React router here, with a dashboard layout as a wrapper for all of the routes, the employee wrapper, which you're gonna see in a moment, as a wrapper which holds the stepper on the top of the form, and all of the steps like this, which each step is a single route. For example, the first step, second, and so on until the review step and their corresponding element or component here. Now, the main focus is on the features folder here. We talked about the layout, which is a very simple feature. Confirm also is responsible to get the user's confirmation on different operations. And we have two main features for our form handling, the form feature and also the employee feature. First of all, let's review this form feature here. And let me just close everything. Perfect. Whenever you start a React project, doesn't matter what is the component library or the form library or even the validation library. I always recommend you to create a form feature, and in that folder, you try to create different controllers or wrappers for every component that you want to use and to create a wrapper around that component from that component library. If I give you an example, for example, the text field controller here inside the controllers folder, let me just open it. We see a very maintainable pattern that we can also use, for example, this pattern here also for other components like autocomplete, checkbox, and so much more. From this point of the tutorial, the project will be heavily dependent on reacthookform itself and the Zod for the validation. So if you want to learn more about this library, you can check description down below. I have a full free thorough explanation and tutorial on the reacthookform itself. So check it out if you want. I try to import the text field or other related things from my desired UI components library. I'm going to create necessary types for it. Also, you can also create a different type file for them or even types folder, but for simplicity I'm gonna keep all the similar things collocated to each other. Now if I head over down here, whenever my component main text field component starts here, this is the component that I'm gonna use throughout my project, and at the end of this file here I'm gonna export it so we can use wherever that I want. Here in this component or in any other controllers here, the goal is to wrap the text field or input field from your desired UI components library and wrap it inside another component and add functionality to it to make it have more features, easier to use, and scalability in mind. The thing that really helped me throughout handling big forms with many fields and components is to use this useForm context hook provided by reacthookform. So if we try to wrap our whole form feature inside a provider provided by the reacthookform, we can use all the functionality on that form wherever that component or that child is instead of passing the properties, which is really gonna be problematic for very nested children and components structure. So by using this form context and adding your desired form and also these controllers here, the text fields or the complete and so much more, we can always access the functionalities on our form using only a simple useForm context hook. So as you can see, we are not going to pass anything extra rather than only the type for our schema, which we are going to see in a moment, and also the name of our field, which is going to be controlled by the RHF controller itself. So first of all, we are going to providing the ref itself and getting the type of the form as a generic to have much more type safety. We're gonna get all of the props. Let me just head over to these text field props here. So first of all, I'm gonna create this type here, our main type for our component, extending it using TypeScript generics. getting all of the original MUI text field props instead of the name, error, and helper text, which we are going to do it in another way, the name for our field, and also the formatter to create a very good user experience for each field. For example, the user knows what the format of the phone number is or how should be the price be filled with good separation. But it's a nice touch, but it's not necessary for this tutorial. But the main thing here is passing generics like this, extending the original types of the original component, and also adding functionality to it. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, let me just head over to my components here. First of all, we're going to get the control from the form context with this in mind that our form is wrapped inside a form provider by React hook form, and if we don't do that, the app will throw an error and makes us to put the form inside a provider. We're gonna give it an initial style. Keep this control in your mind here. Here, we're gonna get the controller from React hook form itself. We are passing the name of the field, which we are gonna pass to our controller here. The control itself getting from the use form context. And inside the render method provided by the RHF controller, we're going to pass our original text field component here, imported from MUI text field. We're going to pass the ref itself, provided errors from the React hook form library, the message as a helper text, the enhanced stylings, and also some other things like formatting the component, and so much more. And the possibilities here are endless, and you can also do whatever you want. And this will be applied for all of your text fields throughout your project. And with this way, with the minimum amount of properties passed to each of these controllers in each instance, you can more focus on your form design instead of passing props to your different form controllers. That was for our text field here, and all of other components also follow these patterns. For example, for our slider, which is a slider that we can drag it to the left or right. Here it is mostly simple to this. To the previous text field that we just examined, we have our props here, our formatter, our tooltip formatter, forward ref, passing types as generics, extending the original MUI slider props, and also destructing some of our properties like this, getting the control from the form context. We're going to get to this read-only in a few moments. And also, again, we try to wrap our component here inside the controller by passing the name control and destruct the fields on the render method. And inside the render method, we are going to show whatever that we want our component. For example, I really want to add the name of our form field above the slider here. So if the user provides the label here, a simple text will be show up above the slider. Also, I always want to see the value current selected on the slider, and so much more, which is your preference. The same applies for all other components here, and you can see them for yourself. They're mostly similar to each other, and you can also extend these controllers to your needs. You can add or create wrappers and controllers from other UI components and even other components, checkbox, autocomplete, and so much more. And also this autocomplete here is a little bit trickier than the other components because of its complicated typings, because we're going to use this autocomplete as a two-in-one solution, a multiple selectable autocomplete, and also a single selectable autocomplete, which can cause some challenges for our type system, but it also follows the same and previous structure by defining the autocomplete props, passing the ref itself, destructing the props, some of them, getting the context, and also creating a render. But the render here is a little bit more complex than the others, but the context remains the same here, like this. Let me just close this here and here. Let me just open again another controller. For example, I'm going to open the text field here again. And if you paid attention closely, you're going to see that we are destructing a read-only property from our useForm context. But by default, a read-only property is not presented on the useForm context provided by the React hook form. So instead of importing these useForm context from React hook form itself, I'm going to import it. Let me just scroll up here. I'm going to import it from my form feature here inside the hooks and inside another use useForm context that I created to enhance the capabilities of the React hook form context like this. And this custom useForm context that we are going to use it throughout our project is going to get the all functionalities from the RHF form context itself and adding another read-only property that, for example, I needed and was not on the RHF itself. So instead of creating and wrapping our children inside another context provider, why not try to use the form context itself and adding functionalities and types or other properties to it. So I needed this feature. Let me just open the project itself. For example, by default, all of the fields are not read-only and user can edit them and type whatever that he wants. But for example, I also needed to create a form summary page where the user only can view and read the form fields like this, and if the user tries to type it or tries to select another state or city, he cannot. He only can view and read the options. So by changing only a property on our form provider, we can force all of our fields to go into the read-only state and to use this read-only. For example, let me just open one of my controllers here, for example my text field component, and to use this read-only property here, as we saw earlier, we're going to get the control field from our custom form context here, and also the read-only property that we just added to our form context. And we can change these read-only on our form provider that we're going to see in a few moments, and all of our fields will become read-only instead of trying to create different components for the same usage with the least amount of code. So always try to wrap the existing functionalities inside your wrapper and add functionalities, extra functionalities to it instead of creating and reinventing the fields from scratch. Also, the useForm logger is useful for debugging purposes. You can use this hook wherever that you want, and all of the changes to the form and current values are going to be listed on the console. Also, I have created a few more components. One of them is the error message that is also going to get functionalities from the React hook form error message library and extend it and adding to get the errors that it cannot do by default. Also, a form error summary here, which is a very customized component that is used to help the user to see all of the errors generated by Zod and handled by React hook form all at once. I'm talking about, let me just close it here. For example, let me just make some fields invalid here and click on submit here. The form summary component here is responsible to show this component here and all of the errors that are currently on the form, and if the form is on submitted state, all of them are going to be listed in line and also will be gathered together in a simple component with focusing properties by clicking on it. And the beauty of it is it's totally synchronized by the Zod validations, error messages. It has great user accessibility and so much other things. So also you can customize it to your needs. For the last component from our form feature here is the form wrapper itself, which follows also a similar pattern to our previous components and controllers. A simple properties type here, passing the generic, getting the needed properties from the parent itself, like children, the schema of the form, the title of the form, what are we going to do on submitting or where the form is submitted on error state, and also the read-only property that I was talking about, and so much other fields. We're going to get the form object itself from the use form on React hook form. We're going to pass the validation type from the parent, the current values, the initial default values, and also the resolver. So because we are using the Zod itself, we're going to use the Zod resolver from the hook form resolvers itself. Also, we are going to add other functionality like adding a simple conditional reset button. We're going to extend the form itself by the read-only property that we just created earlier, and we're gonna wrap all the children here that we're gonna pass from the parent inside a form component provided by React hook form, and we're gonna pass the and destruct the extended form properties here. We're gonna create a good grid wrapper from MUI with consistent spacings, good form submit and error handlings like this, adding reset the form button here and render it conditionally, the form error summary component that we just earlier, the children here. And if the form is on read-only state, we're not gonna need to show the user the submit button itself. And also you can view all the things that we just saw earlier. This is our reset and title button, form summary, the form content itself, and the submit button. And with this way of using and creating a wrapper form component, we're gonna see a very consistent and easy to maintain a style of handling forms, which is perfect. Now that was for the form feature itself. If you have any questions regarding this way of handling forms, especially in React hook form, Zod and MUI, feel free to comment your question down below. Let me just close everything here. And for our main functionality here, the employee feature here, for each step, we're gonna have a sub feature like this and a wrapper feature that is gonna gather all of the schemas and data here, do some final checks, and also let the user view the summary of the form and submit the data wherever that he wants. Let me just start by explaining the first step, which is this step here, which is responsible to gather, and save the user's employee's personal info by these fields, first name, last name, and so much other fields here. Let me just open this step here. The patterns and structures are mostly the same between all of the features and sub-features, and this really helps us when our project scales and makes it easier to maintain. Let me just start by the page.tsx that is presenting in all of the features and sub-features and is responsible to exporting all the features and functionalities from a module that we can use in other modules. You can name it whatever that you want, the feature, child, consumer, it doesn't really matter here. And we're gonna use it. First of all, we're gonna export it like this. First of all, we're gonna wrap it inside the provider that I'm gonna explain you in a few moments. We're gonna change the name of this named export, and we're gonna use it inside our routes here, exactly in this path here, like this. So all of these logic and functionalities that we see in each sub feature are gonna be presented by a single presenter to the outside world of this feature or sub feature itself. Now let me just close the file explorer and explain what are we gonna do in this component here. First of all, I'm gonna explain you the provider phase of this component or similar components to it. As I told you before, this way of handling the forms by passing the least amount of properties to the children is really dependent on using the form context, the use form context provided by the React hook form. So first of all, before we try to add or use our field components and logics, first of all, we're gonna wrap and create a simple provider like this. We're gonna import the form from the form component that we created earlier. We're gonna pass our schema that we're gonna see in a few moments, our form data getting from the Zustand store, and also we're going to examine it, our default values, handle submit, which is the functionality that user expects when submit the form. For example, when the user tries to submit this form, first of all, the form data on the local storage and Zustand store is going to be updated by the validated form data, and also the user will be redirected and navigated to the next step of the form, which is the history of the employee. First of all, let me just show you what this user store is. As you can see here, for each feature, we're going to have a hooks folder and a use store hook here, which is responsible to defining the state, the actions of our store, merging them together, creating a very simple store with these values, the default values that we're gonna see in a few moments, the updating functionalities, which because we are using immer, updating a state is really easy in this way. And also this create a store follows a similar pattern that we just saw earlier. Let me just open it. It's also a custom wrapper for the Zustand create function here that the thing that this do is that it's gonna handle and adding some middlewares to this Zustand. Also, if you want to learn more about Zustand, you can follow and watch my full video on Zustand in the description down below for free. We're using Immer middleware here to make our lives easier. We're gonna pass the storage type, whether we want to persist the data on the local storage or not, and a name for our store on the user's storage. And for example, if the user does not want to skip the persisting on local storage, we're gonna use our wrapper functionality, and using the persist middleware with our Immer store, we're gonna name our store on our local storage, the name provided by the user, and also create a very simple stringified JSON storage on the user's local storage. And so whenever the user changes the form fields and tries to submit the form here, the corresponding, let me just open the store creation, the user store hook here, the Zustand and its middlewares are going to create a store, or in other words, a very simple JSON object on the local storage with this name. Here, employee personal info store here, which is exactly the fields that the user has entered, and we can use all these saved values on the user's local storage at the end of our review, and whenever we hit the submit button, we have access to that data with this fact that we are not anymore on that page, and the user might have refreshed his page many times, but the data are still there, which provides a very powerful user experience. The use queries hook here is really your preference and the way that you want to handle your communication with the server that you are using. For simplicity and amazing developer experience, I'm going to use the React query itself. Very simple as this. I'm going to get in the states, get the cities, and simulating them that they are coming from the server. But if I head over to it, it's this simple api.ts file that is going to return and give me the data that I want with a simple wait for you to see the loading states, and it's gonna return the values as label and values as an array, so we can use in our select menu or the complete components. Nothing very special. Now for one of the most important files inside each feature, we're gonna have a schema.ts file. This schema.ts file is responsible to handle all validations and checks on the user, on the data that the user enters in each field. For example, I don't want to let the user leave the first name field as empty by setting the min to 1, and I don't want to let the user to add more than 50 characters. So to see that in action, when the user tries to make this field invalidate, the require field will be raised, and if the user tries to open more than 50 characters, the error here is going to be shown to the user. So everything that we just specified for our field is reflected here and in what the user sees. But the errors that Zod itself generates by default is not, for example, the required or maximum 50 characters allowed, and are really much more technical. So it's not very scalable and maintainable solution to add the error messages like this. For example, if the user tries to leave this field, it's not very maintainable to, for example, required field for all of our fields for all of their validations. And we can also, it's not very applicable, for example, something like this, maximum 50 characters like this, and do it for all the other fields with different configs and options, and it's not very maintainable. So we want a much more consistent solution because it makes our lives easier. Also, the user is gonna have an amazing user experience. So let me just revert it to the original state here like this, and head over to the main.tsx file here. As we saw earlier, we're gonna wrap all of our project requirements inside all of their specific providers, and here I have prepared a setup Zod errors here, which is a very simple utility inside our utils function here with the name of Zod config or whatever that you want. This is responsible to make the errors with your preference and make them much more user friendly. This is all automatically done by using this function above our create root function here. And for the errors, for example, when the error is of type invalid type, we can specify if the field is not provided or the user has not entered anything, the error message will be required, or if is of type date, the error is related, and also for all other things. For example, if you want to show the user instead of required message, for example, another message like this, the field is required or something like this, you can also change it globally for your project. Also, you can specify and using the issue, the context on the issue provided by the Zod itself. For example, you can show the minimum characters required to the user itself for a better and much more readability for the user. You can also extend it to your needs and making it much bigger for your needs. Now let me just head over, get back to our schema file here. All the other things here are mostly common in Zod world. For example, I'm going to force the user to enter a state, a city, a street address, and I'm going to using regex validation for custom fields like social security number and so much more. And at the end, I'm going to export default values with the type of our schema, which I'm going to infer it using the Zod inferring system. And I'm going to create the empty state of our form, which is necessary for React Hook form for better performance and better error handling. And I'm gonna export them like this, the schema itself, the type of a schema, default values. And because I'm gonna use this schema outside of this module itself, I'm gonna export it with the correct name of the module. So I'm gonna know what the name of this schema outside the world. So I'm gonna use this name whenever I try to use this schema outside this feature here. And I'm gonna using the schema itself inside the feature itself for better naming conventions and name handlings inside the project and making our code less cluttered and easier to understand. Now let me just again open the page.tsx file here. Now that we have talked about our providers, our schema, form data, default values, and so much other things, the beauty comes here in our page component, or whatever you want to name it, the consumer component here. First of all, we're going to get the states and cities data, which is irrelevant to this tutorial. And after that, we're going to get the control and set value from the custom use from context that we just created earlier. We're going to get the state easily on our form, the state that the user has selected so far. And we're going to use it, for example, conditionally to render the city or the complete. So whenever the user is not selected a state, we're not going to show the user the city for better user experience. And for example, if the user tries to, for example, empty the state field, also under the hood, the city field also will be emptied with the state itself. Now here we are going to using the grid from MUI or whatever your solution is. It's all your preference, but the beauty of this is here. The custom components that we just created earlier here, we're going to simply only pass the name of our schema. Let me just open the schema here. For example, I specified that the user needs to enter a first name field here. So here, let me just remove it here and using the VS Code IntelliSense itself. I don't know why my IntelliSense is not working, but if you try to enter something invalid in this field, it's going to be prompted as red. So we are here 100% sure that the corresponding name here is really existed on the form itself by passing this generic and handling it inside our custom text field like this. And also the other thing that we are going to need to pass, for example, in this simple text field is the label of it. So the name of it is going to be the first name, which I created a very simple solution to handle our dictionaries, but I really not recommend this way of doing it. But it's very applicable for a small project. And this is the same for other things. Our custom date picker component that we are going to use it here by passing the name of the field and so much other things like this. And for example, if this field is phone number, I'm going to pass the format to phone number, and the user is going to see these underscores or parentheses for entering his phone number much better. Also for security, social number, our autocompletes that we're going to get the options from the server with handle loading state. Let me just refresh it. We see that the loadings are handled perfectly. And that's mostly it for our first step of our stepper. Now this pattern that we just saw here is mostly going to be repeated throughout all of our other sub modules with different and some changes to it, so it makes them suitable for their needs. Let me just open the next page here, our history page, and let us review it again. The current employment and highest degree are not really special, but the existence of this field here is related that whether the user has entered a specific option, as you see here, a specific option on this field. So the validations also is going to be changed because the user has selected the other option on this field. The validations under the hood of our field controller is going to be dynamic also. Also, we're going to have field arrays like this, as we just saw earlier, and it's a very common scenarios in enterprise forms like this, where the user needs to specify his previous employers like this, removing them, adding different names, and so much more. Now let's try to implement it inside React. The page is mostly the same. We're gonna specify and getting the data or the things from our form context itself. We're gonna conditionally render different components. If, for example, the user has selected the other option here, the reason for leaving enum, if the user has selected the other option, this dynamic field is going to be shown to him, but it's not only enough to render the fields conditionally, also we need to handle them on our schema here, which we're going to see it in a few moments. Now also for our field arrays, I decided to create a components folder and try to put these two into more capsulated logic so we can use it throughout our project and makes our scripts and components easier to read. The provider is the same. We have handled submit, we're saving and getting the data from the store, and we also wrap our page inside it, and we're going to export the provider as employee history here to use it inside our route. Now let me just open the educational institutions, for example, and explain it a little bit. Here, first of all, we're going to again use the control and read only from our use form context. We're going to use the capabilities on React hook form related to field arrays. Also, if you want to learn more about the React hook form itself, I have a thorough explanation and tutorial video on my YouTube channel, so also you can check it out. This is the logic for handling when the user clicks on add, which we expect to append a new item to this field array, which is employer name, job title, and responsibilities. Sorry, the educational institutions is here, degree obtained, field of study institution name, and the graduation year here, which is default, has set to the last pass year. A remove button, which is very simple and it's gonna remove the entry like this. Most of them here are self-explanatory, and the thing here is we need to get the fields from the field array here and map over them and render our desired form structure like this for each entry of our fields. Like this, also for each iteration of our map function here, we simply pass our field address on our schema with a specific index of our current iteration, and also you can learn all of these in my separate React hook form tutorial. And if the user has not entered any educational institutions, the required message is going to be shown to the user here because of this error message, a custom error message component here. Now the thing is a little bit much different from previous feature is this schema here. For better maintainability, I try to make my schema and convert it into a few more modular parts. This is my gathered schema here, the current employment status, reasons for leaving, other reasons for leaving, highest degree obtained, and also the previous employers and educational institutions, which is going to be an array of their specific schemas that we just defined them above this schema here. And the tricky part here, because our form is going to have dynamic validations, as I told you before, whenever the user do something, let me just make the form a little bit less cluttered like this. Perfect. And when the user tries to hit the save and continue button, because the other option is selected here and we have specified explicitly here on our super refine on our Zod object here that if the user reasons for leaving previous jobs contains of the other enum here or something like this, and if that's true, we're going to add a new issue to our Zod context here, and the issue message is required. This required is going to be presented exactly for our form and the pass is gonna be exactly attached to this field, which is gonna be represented here. So if the user tries to submit now, he cannot do it because he has selected the other option here, and user needs to fill it and head over to the next page. Or if the user tries to remove it, he can also safely continue. And this was the logic behind the dynamic field validations. This is one of the ways that you can do it. You can also use discriminated unions or unions, but the super refined method on the Zod itself is mostly suitable for most of the scenarios. That was for our history feature here. The additional feature is mostly the same. Also, we have another field array or references here, similar hooks, types here, which is mostly the same, mostly like the history feature itself. And then we're gonna use more custom components like a slider, and this is it. And to gather all of the data and to handle the stepper logic or the summary dialog that is going to be opened at the end, we're going to create a simple wrapper function component here. Our stepper is responsible to handle the validity of each page and show the error of the page exactly on the corresponding step to the user. So the user is always going to know what step has some problems according to it if something went wrong. So first of all, we're going to read the data from our store like this for each page. Then we are going to safe parse them using the Zod itself. And if one of them are true, validated, or not validated, our corresponding steps are here. And we're going to map over these steps and show a button for each step. And if the form is not on the success state, a simple invalid text with the color of red is going to be displayed below each button here, which is a very nice touch. Also, we have our summary dialog, which is going to be opened at the end. We're going to first of all get all of our data for each pages, gather them together here, and try to parse them on a schema that is a wrapper schema around all of the other schemas, which are merged together into a single mega schema here. And all of our data for the last time is going to be validated, and after that is going to be sent to the server like this. And if an error occurs, a simple snack bar will be shown to the user. And if you have noticed, now we have used this component in our routes.tsx file here as a simple route, and also because of better maintainability, we decided to also use this to show the user the summary of the form, but with the read-only capabilities. So if we pass the read-only property to it, all of the fields are going to be not editable by the user. So we can also use the pages that we just created earlier at many other places that we want by passing the least amount of properties. We have a simple close and submit button for the summary dialog. Also, the use mutation is its logic is capsulated inside it. We're going to reading the data from the store and creating the data on the server, for example, with all of these gathered data. The store is self-explanatory. The schema is all of our schemas merged together, utils, and the page itself, which is summary dialog here, the stepper, the divider here, and the outlet itself, which is going to be render each page, each step below our divider and stepper. So this was one of the best ways that you can handle the enterprise level forms, especially the wizard-like or multi-step forms, which can be really painful to do, but in modern React TypeScript web development, with the help of so much other utilities and packages like Zod, reacthookform, Zustand, and TypeScript, it can be easy to do with great user and developer experience and with capability and scalability in mind. I hope you have enjoyed. If you have any questions regarding this video, feel free to leave a comment down below, and me or other people are going to help you out. Hope you have enjoyed.